The morning sun cast a golden glow over Willow Creek Estates, a pristine suburban enclave where manicured lawns and white picket fences whispered of order and control. I stood in my driveway, adjusting the straps of my sister Lily's wheelchair, her soft hazel eyes tracking my movements with quiet trust. 6 months ago, a car accident had stolen her ability to walk, and I'd turned my life upside down to care for her, converting my study into her bedroom, hiring therapists, and building a temporary wooden ramp to bridge the gap between her world and mine. It wasn't elegant, just a few sturdy planks and a handrail, but it worked. Or it had, until Margaret Voss decided it didn't. Margaret, our HOA president, strutted toward us that crisp October morning, her heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome counting down to chaos. She clutched a clipboard, her auburn hair pulled into a tight bun that matched the severity of her expression. Behind her trailed 2 board members, Tom Grayson, a retired accountant with a perpetual frown, and Sheila Carter, a real estate agent whose smile never quite reached her eyes. They were her loyal shadows, nodding at every word she spat. "Good morning, Daniel," Margaret called, her voice syrupy with fake warmth. "We're here for an unscheduled inspection of that structure." She waved a manicured hand at the ramp, as if it were a pile of garbage defiling her perfect neighborhood. I exhaled sharply, glancing at my watch. Lily's physical therapy appointment was in 30 minutes, and I didn't have time for this. "Margaret, I've told you it's temporary. The permanent ramp's being installed next month. I've got the city permits, the contractor's schedule, everything. Can this wait?" Her lips curled into a smile that didn't budge. "I'm afraid not. The board voted last night. That ramp is an eyesore, a clear violation of our architectural standards. It's dragging down property values." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. "You've got 24 hours to remove it, or fine start at due law, $250 a day." Lily's hand brushed my arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Dan, we're going to be late." I forced a nod, swallowing the heat rising in my chest. "We'll talk when I get back," I said, guiding Lily's wheelchair down the ramp and into my SUV. As I buckled her in, I caught Margaret snapping photos of the ramp with her phone, her lips pursed in smug satisfaction. Something about her glee twisted my gut, but I shoved it down. Lily needed me calm. The therapy session ran long. Lily's progress was slow, agonizingly, but her therapist was optimistic, and that was enough to keep me going. By the time we pulled back into the driveway, 3 hours later, the sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of amber. What I saw next stopped me cold. The ramp was gone. Splintered planks lay in a heap on my lawn, like the wreckage of a ship. 2 burly men in work boots stood nearby, wiping sweat from their brows, while Margaret's Super VY said from the sidewalk, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. A small crowd of neighbors lingered at a distance, their murmurs buzzing like static. I slammed the car door and stormed toward her. "What the hell are you doing?" Margaret didn't flinch. "Enforcing HOA regulations, Daniel. You were served notice. The board deemed this an immediate violation under Section 9. Clause 4 of our bylaws on approved structures compromising community aesthetics must be removed without delay. You gave me 24 hours. My voice cracked with fury. "How is my sister supposed to get inside now?" She shrugged, her diamond earrings glinting in the fading light. "That's not the HOA's problem. You should have followed protocol. Maybe this will teach you to respect the rules." Lily sat silently in the car, her head bowed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The sight of her vulnerable, stranded ignited something primal in me. I turned to the workers. "Who authorized this?" They exchanged uneasy glances before one muttered, "She did." Said it was urgent. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "It's done. Consider it a lesson in compliance." She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back with a sigh. "Fine, I'll be generous. Boys, help the girl inside just this once." What happened next unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. The workers hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. So Margaret, impatient as ever, pushed past them and seized the handles of Lily's wheelchair herself. It's not rocket science, she snapped. Just lift her up the steps. Margaret, wait. I lunged forward, but she was already tilting the chair back, her movements jerky and careless. Lily's knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrests, her voice trembling. Please be careful. Margaret ignored her, wrestling the chair onto the first of the 7 concrete steps leading to my porch. She had no clue how to maneuver if her arms shook, her footing slipped. I reached for the handles, but before I could take control, the wheelchair lurched. Margaret yelped, her grip faltered, and the chair tipped sideways. Time froze as Lily tumbled backward, a sharp cry escaping her lips as she and the wheelchair crashed down the steps in a tangle of metal and flesh. I hit my knees beside her, heart hammering. Lily, are you okay? She was sprawled on the grass, tears streaming down her face, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath her. The wheelchair lay on its side, a wheel still spinning uselessly. Margaret stood at the top of the steps, brushing off her hands. Well, that was unfortunate, she said, her tone dripping with irritation rather than remorse. This is precisely why unapproved mobility aids are a liability. I stared at her, disbelief warring with rage. You just threw my sister down the stairs, and you're blaming the wheelchair? She fell. Margaret corrected, stepping back. It's not my fault your equipment isn't suited for stairs. Maybe you should have planned better. Lily winced as I gently lifted her back into the chair, her breath hitching. Damn, my arm hurts. Bad. We're going to the hospital, I said, my voice low and tight. I glared at Margaret, who was already retreating with her lackeys. This isn't over. She flashed that cold, smug smile. Oh, it is. And if you rebuild that ramp without approval, the fines triple. As I drove Lily to the ER, my mind churned. For 10 years, I'd lived quietly in Willow Creek, keeping my career as a federal judge under wraps. I'd wanted a sanctuary, a place where I wasn't Judge Daniel Harper, presiding over discrimination and CIVYL rights cases in the 11th Circuit, but just Dan, the guy who mowed his lawn on Saturdays. Now, that anonymity felt like a liability. Margaret had no idea who she just crossed or what I could do about it. The ER was a blur of white coats and antiseptic. X-rays revealed a fractured forearm and 2 bruised ribs minor compared to what could have happened, the doctor said, but serious enough to keep Lily in a cast for weeks. She's lucky, he added, scribbling notes. Wheelchair falls can be catastrophic, especially with her condition. How did this happen? He asked, peering over his glasses. I recounted the story Margaret's ramp demolition, her reckless grab at the wheelchair, the fall. His face hardened. That's an ADA violation at minimum. Possibly assault. You've got grounds for legal action if you want it. I'm weighing my options, I said, my mind already racing ahead. Lily squeezed my hand as they fitted her cast. It's not your fault, Dan. You couldn't predict she'd go that far. But I should have. I'd seen Margaret's type before petty tyrants drunk on small power, wielding rules like weapons. I'd underestimated her, and Lily had paid the price. Back home, neighbors swarmed us. Mrs. Elena Ortiz, a retired nurse who lived across the street, rushed over with a blanket and a thermos of tea. I saw it all, she whispered, her dark eyes flashing. That woman's unhinged. My security camera caught everything say the word, and the footage is yours. Others pitched in too. For men guys I barely knew beyond a nod at the mailbox lifted Lily's chair up the steps and into the house, their faces grim. Margaret's gone too far, one muttered. This ain't right. Once Lily was settled with a heating pad and pain meds, I retreated to my office and dialed a number I'd hoped to avoid. Judge Harper's chambers, came Susan's crisp voice. My clerk for 8 years, she was a bulldog with a law degree and a knack for anticipating my needs. Susan, it's me. Clear my docket for tomorrow and pull every ADA and Fair Housing Act precedent you can find. I've got a situation. Personal or professional? She asked, already typing. Both. I'll explain later. Oh, and draft a subpoena for security footage from 124 Willow Lane. We're MOVYing fast. I hung up and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Margaret thought she'd won. that her little kingdom of bylaws and fines could crush us. She didn't know she'd just awakened a storm. The next morning, Margaret called an emergency HOA meeting to address my hostile behavior, or Lily insisted on coming, her arm in a sling, her jaw set with quiet defiance. We arrived at the community Centera sterile room of folding chairs and fluorescent lights to find it packed. Margaret sat at the head table, gavel in hand, her posture radiating authority. Tom and Sheila flanked her, their expressions unreadable. She banged the gavel with a flourish. This meeting is called to order. We're here to discuss the Harper property's ongoing violations and Daniel Harper's threatening conduct toward this board. For 20 minutes, she spun her Talamy unsightly ramp, my refusal to comply my aggressive tone the day before. She projected photos of my house on a screen, circling the ramp's former spot like a prosecutor marking EVY Denke. Mr. Harper's actions undermine our community's standards, she concluded, folding her arms. Does he wish to respond? I stood, smoothing my jacket, and felt the room shift. Before I address Margaret's claims, let's add some context she's conveniently left out. I nodded to Elena, who plugged her phone into the projector. The footage played in stark clarity, Margaret ordering the ramp's destruction, grabbing Lily's wheelchair, fumbling with it, then letting it slip. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Lily tumbled down the steps, her cry echoing in the silence. Margaret's voice followed, cool and detached. Well, that was unfortunate. Margaret shot to her feet. That's edited. I was assisting her. Assisting. I cut in, my voice steady but sharp. You demolished a city-approved accessibility ramp, Leah VYing my disabled sister stranded. Then you mishandled her wheelchair, causing injuries that landed her in the ER. That's not assistance if that's negligence, if not assault. The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret's face flushed, but she doubled down. The ramp was unapproved by the HOA, and your actions violate federal law, I said, stepping closer. For those who don't know me, I've lived here quietly for a decade. I've kept my work private because I value this community. But it's time you knew. I'm Daniel Harper, federal judge for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. I specialize in housing discrimination and ADA cases like this. Margaret's smug mask cracked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Whispers turned to shouts. A judge. She's done for. I pressed on. Yesterday's stunt briefed the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and possibly criminal statutes. The ramps reinstated, effective immediately, and I expect a formal apology from this board by noon tomorrow. That's just the start. Chaos erupted. Neighbors surged forward, some yelling at Margaret, others offering support to Lily. Tom and Sheila shrank in their seats, suddenly very interested in their notepads. Margaret banged her gavel uselessly. This is outrageous. You can't intimidate us. I'm not intimidating, I said, meeting her gaze. I'm informing. You'll hear from my attorney by week's end. Margaret resigned that afternoon, citing family obligations, but the damage was done. By evening, federal marshals rolled into Willow Creek with warrants not just for her actions against Lily, but for something bigger. Susan's research had unearthed whispers of HOA financial irregularities, and a quick audit of the books confirmed it. Margaret had siphoned over $80,000 into personal accounts over 2 years, masked as consulting fees and maintenance costs. The news hit the neighborhood like a thunderclap. At her trial 3 months later, over which I recused myself to avoid bias, the prosecution painted a damning picture. Margaret Voss, HOA tyrant, had ruled with an iron fist while skimming dues to fund her La VYSH lifestyle. Designer bags, spa retreats, a second car all courtesy of Willow Creek's homeowners. The courtroom was packed, mostly with furious neighbors. Lily sat beside me, her cast off but her spirit still healing. Margaret took the stand, defiant to the end. I was protecting property values, she insisted. Everything I did was for the community. Even pushing a disabled woman downstairs, the prosecutor asked, playing Elena's footage again. Margaret had no answer. The verdict came swiftly, 3 years in prison for fraud. Dula 150,000 in fines and restitution for ADA violations, and a lifetime ban from HOA leadership. As marshals cuffed her, she glared at me, her smugness replaced by raw fear. Willow Creek changed after that. The new board, led by Elena, turned the recovered funds into an accessibility initiative ramps, widened sidewalks, a community van for residents like Lily. Lily's recovery gained momentum, buoyed by neighbors who'd once stood silent but now rallied around her. 8 months later, a letter arrived from Margaret, postmarked from prison. "I never saw the harm I caused," she wrote in shaky cursive. "Rules without heart aren't power they repoison. I'm sorry." Lily read it aloud, then set it aside. "She thought she was breaking us," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But she just broke herself." I nodded, watching the sunset paint our ramp now, permanent, and painted a defiant reading hues of fire. Justice hadn't just prevailed in the courtroom. It had rebuilt a community, plank by plank. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.